Hello, friends, and welcome to the Sensitivity Rising podcast. I am one of your hosts, Tonya.
I'm Amber, and today's episode is all about letting go and unlearning.
Awesome. I'm so excited about this. But first, if you're a fan of the show, please click the listen link in the show notes to subscribe for free on your platform of choice. So now, Amber, let's talk about letting go and unlearning. I think this is such an important topic, especially for us as sensitive people.
Yes, absolutely. And it's just something that I think, we always talk about learning new things, but we don't very often talk about unlearning things or letting things go quite as much.
Yeah, that's so true. And especially this time of year, autumn is such a good time to really think about what we want to start to let go of and also to start to bring some awareness into our daily lives about some of the habits, beliefs, thoughts that maybe aren't serving us in the ways that they once did, and the things that hold us back from living the life that we really want to live and living the life that we really deserve. And I find that as highly sensitive people, we can easily, what I call time travel. So, really living in the past, focusing on regrets or things that didn't go the way that we'd planned or the way that we'd wanted them to. Or a lot of times we can really live in the future worrying about what might happen. And I feel like we can easily start to get stuck in a loop of this worry, fear, um, regret kind of loop where we really have trouble focusing on the present moment and letting go of some of these attachments that we have to these feelings. Another
Yeah.
way, oh, I'm sorry, Amber, please.
I was going to say, this time of year, that past and present living that you talk about in the time travel, I think we're all really guilty of at times. But this time of year specifically always reminds me of that because as being in the Northeast here, as the colors change, it's such a short window of when the colors are really vibrant and they're so beautiful and they hit me so deeply that multiple times every autumn I'll hit this moment where I'll realize maybe I'm driving and I'm not as in the present moment because I'm doing that past or future thing. And I'll see the colors and I'll remember, oh my gosh, I need to soak this in. I need to be in the moment and soak these in because they're not going to last very long. And it's the same thing, the sound of the leaves on the ground. One of my other favorite things about this time of year is that crunching. I actually will intentionally step on the dry, crispy leaves because I like
Yes.
how it sounds and it feels. And both of those bring me right back to this present moment, which is so important and hard to remember sometimes. And so always in autumn, I'm always remembered of that. Like you said, that time travel and staying present.
Yes, time travel. That's really the best way that I can think of it. One of my teachers taught that to me. I was like, that's the perfect description, right? Time travel. That's what we're doing, and we're not even really aware of it sometimes. We get the stuff that we get stuck in, that can really keep us from stepping into the light, especially as sensitive people. And Sensitivity Rising is all about helping sensitive people rise up and step into the light and take their place in the world that they deserve. And a lot of times we get stuck in the stories too, right? Of the stories that others have told us about who they think we are, who they think we should be, how we fit into their molds that make them comfortable, right? And also the old ghosts that haunt us, right? So past relationships, past experiences, all those kinds of things. Yeah, so like you were saying, Amber, I think that the trees turning in fall, or even the if the trees don't really turn, where you're listening to this, the weather still changes. You can feel that change in the air that we've talked about. I think in our last episode together, Amber, we talked about that, feeling that kind of that flip of the switch outside. And all of those things can really the more in tune we are with those things, the more we can start to realize that we're not alone in this idea of letting go, right? We're not alone in this process. And the more in tune we are with the nature and environment, things that are going on around us, I think actually the easier it can be for us to start letting go of different things.
Yeah, and I think also the unlearning piece, everything you just said, we get that kind of stuck in the not the present moment, but the past experiences or the future planning, whatever it is. And that is robbing us of the present moment. But we think that we're actually helping ourselves when we're doing these things because we're either thinking we're protecting ourselves from something or planning for something. And while those things can be important in some situations, right, we do often get kind of stuck in them and then we're totally missing this present moment. So that's why I'm really excited that we're talking about letting go and also unlearning kind of together as one topic today.
Yeah. And, also, right, these aren't things that we're typically taught,
Mm,
right? These are things that, if you're listening to this or you're watching us on YouTube, if you were taught these things, how amazing for you, right? But I think most of us, we're not taught these things. They're not really concepts that, at least in the West, are part of our everyday culture. And so we really have to seek them out. And a lot of times we feel like something is missing in our lives or something's not right, but we can't put our finger on it. And um, so a lot of us start to go on this search, right? And we don't know where to look. Um, and so I think that this can be one of those things where if you feel like something is not quite right, this is one way to maybe start to look at some of that. And what are you holding on to that's not serving you?
mm, yeah, that's really well said.
So one of the things we can talk about is letting go of labels and naming things. And this one can kind of get a little bit tricky, I think. Um, and I was thinking of it in terms of, as the planet shifts, right? Because the planet shifts between seasons, we shift with it. We don't have a choice, right? We're just passengers on, spaceship Earth. And so all of these things are happening around us, but we have been taught to separate ourselves from these things. And so as we get closer to the end of the year, like we were saying, this is really a time to start to let go of things that aren't really needed in our lives. And that's easier said than done, obviously. So even just to start thinking about, like I said, some of those habits and things that we have going on, um, that we might want to change. And also, we have a lot of stress, right? And anxiety that we can take on when it comes to things that we don't really have any control over. Um, and for me, a lot of this comes down to the naming part of things, where seeing things as, right or wrong, or likes and dislikes. And what it comes down to, I think, is really we see things as we are and not as they are in reality. And I think a lot of this has to do with naming. Um, the more we try to control these things, the more unhappiness it can really bring us. And the more we try to have others agree with us, um, by trying to control the things that they say or do in whatever way, even if it's in our own mind, not in reality, um, the more we can suffer from that. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. You were talking about like the good and the bad labeling. Um, we do this so often and sometimes not unconsciously because when we label things, they tend to have those words tend to have a connotation related to them that is good or bad, right? And so that can change so much. And I think ties into what you were saying about the time travel Because when we label things a certain way, we're either going back and looking at past experiences, maybe trying to avoid something that was painful,
Mhm.
or and maybe it's an and for trying to protect ourselves from that thing in the past happening again, right? So we're using labels, and we're predicting by using the labels, we're predicting how the world around us is going to respond to whatever. And this is all kind of unconsciously under the surface, but we're just setting ourselves up for all of this past and future stuff and not staying present and not really being in touch with what is truly the reality right now, because those labels are, you know, they have a connotation to them. And also, we don't necessarily know what everybody else's journey is, and everything is always changing. So, you can't really predict. I think that's been one of something I realized in relationships a lot in the past, right? Is when people have some sort of conflict or way that they're being, whether friendships or relationships or whatever, people start predicting how the other person is going to respond, even if there's been a conversation around, oh no, actually, we're going to do it this way. I know that when I do this, it bothers you. And when you do this, it bothers me. We're going to try this approach instead, right? But it seems like most of the time, both people move forward as if they have changed, but the other person's still going to respond the old way. And
Mhm.
I think that comes right down to the labeling and kind of how we get into that trap of future and past. Does that resonate with you, or?
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of it just with labeling itself, right? And the way that you were describing it, it makes me think of it's really just our human instinct, right? It's our human nature to label things in our past, right? So as something that was dangerous or a
Mhm.
threat to us, right? So then our system is heightened to kind of look for those things, right? Because it's a survival mechanism.
Yeah, and I think this is the place where it gets really tricky, is because I know in my own journey, there were certain things that I needed to have labeled to make sense of things that had happened to me in my past. And that was critical for my healing, to understand what those things were, right? But at a certain point, it doesn't help me anymore to label those things. And as I progress on my journey, I try more and more to not label things from the start at all, because we can get really stuck there. When you start labeling things like that, it goes back to that relationship dynamic that I was talking about, um, or just anything in general. Oh, this is this type of person, or that's that type of person. This is that type of place. I don't want to go there because that's only people that are like this go there. Maybe it's actually a really fun place, and I just don't have the open mind to check it out. So I'm labeling it before maybe I know, or it's keeping me stuck in some way. Just to kind of speak in some generalities and examples. Have you had experiences with that too? I can't
Of
imagine.
course I have. Of course I have. And probably the same as you. I don't really I struggle with that much less
Yeah,
than I used to. And I think a lot of that really just comes from life experience and, you know, trying to be as open as you can, but a lot of that really just comes with time. I
for
think
sure.
it just comes with
And that
time, trial and
healing,
error, healing.
because I do think the labels can be really important. I don't want to tell people, I don't want to send the message that labels are always bad. It goes back
Yeah,
to,
for
I don't want to
sure.
label the labels. um,
Mhm.
because I do think that sometimes those labels are really important for us to find what we need to heal from and move on from certain experiences. But once we go past that point, then learning to let go of them and not seek them out allows us to be much more present and be more open to experiences and people and stuff that can really enrich our lives. So,
Mhm.
but it's tricky. It's like a really fine line there.
It is, it is. And there's that Brene Brown quote where she says, authenticity is the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we are.
Mm,
So, you know, Brene, she's got a quote for every
I
situation.
know. She's she's full of good ones.
So another thing that kind of goes along with that, I think, is letting go of comparing. So
Mm,
this is something that, I mean, we all do it. We all do it to some degree, right? We just
Oh,
can't
it's
help
human nature.
ourselves. We just can't help ourselves. And as many memes as we see, or quotes on social media that say just let go of you're unique and blah blah blah. It's easier said than done, like all of these things that we're talking about. But sometimes I feel like it's, for me anyway, is sometimes it's easier to embrace some things first before you let go. So, embracing my, what I call like quirkiness, embracing our faults, embracing our sensitivity, right? I mean, hello. Um, and everything that makes you, right? Everything that makes me, everything that makes Amber, Amber. And I feel like the more we embrace those parts of ourselves that maybe we're more critical of, or we're taught to be more critical of, that it starts to get easier to let go of comparing myself to my coworker who never seems to get upset
Hmm.
when things go wrong or whatever it is, or my partner who never gets upset when the dishwasher breaks and I have a nervous breakdown because how are we going to do the dishes, or something like just made up, superficial like that. um and as human beings, especially as sensitive human beings, I feel like we can really seek that validation from the outside, right, instead of the inside. And also, as humans, we want that sense of community, we want that sense of acceptance. And so it really takes time and practice and self-compassion, all of these things, to remind ourselves that we're not only learning more every day, but also unlearning, right?
Hmm.
Learning our own path.
Yeah, and the comparing that you're talking about too brings me back to the labeling, right? You mentioned needing to kind of embrace the new thing before letting go. So, like when it comes to comparing, same thing with labeling. When I learned about high sensitivity, I needed that label because, and it's a label and a comparison in that, right? Because I'm comparing myself to the world around me, but I needed that context to understand that all of these other things that are taught to us about how we should, getting into the shoulds and stuff, how we should be, or this is how most people do something, or which is still comparing, right? But has felt a disconnect to us. Those labels and comparing in that way gave me so much context to build my own foundation and who I am and what I need. And then, letting go of the label, so I'm not stuck with, well, the world has to pander to me because I'm highly sensitive and I need more downtime, right? Because that's not true either, right? So understanding the differences without getting stuck in the label or stuck in the comparison, um, of, like you're saying, somebody else can handle it this way and I can't,
Mhm.
but I think also those differences tend to, the part that we miss when we're doing that comparison is, yes, maybe I get really upset and my coworker doesn't. But the thing that's causing me to get upset, there's another side to that that is probably a huge gift that I have that that coworker probably doesn't have, right?
Mhm.
But that gets missed in that moment. So instead of comparing, just seeing our traits for what they are, and both sides, the shadow and the light of those, and that awareness. But I do think we often do need the label and the comparison to start. And then we just have to have the awareness to not get stuck in it and not take it too far. At least that's
Yeah,
been my
no, I totally agree. And I'm the same way. I had the same, probably a similar experience to you when I found out I was highly sensitive. It was like, oh, there's a label for it, right? Oh, there's this thing, there's nothing, quote, wrong with me. It's,
yes.
and so I feel like there's that sense of relief, that sense of community, um, that you get with that label. But also, you're 100% right. It's like, okay, so when do I start to, you know, like you were saying, I think there's a fine line between, when we need to start to let go of it, to see it as part of ourselves instead of our whole identity,
Right.
you
And
know?
also with the labeling of it and the, I mean, you need the comparison just for the juxtaposition of
Yeah.
seeing the differences. But the label also helps open us up to resources. Because if I didn't have a word for it, how would I find other people who might understand my
That is
experiences
so
or
true.
learn, right? So we
Mhm.
need it to a point, and then also it's a very slippery slope where we can just get really attached to it in an unhealthy way that holds us back from really living, which is the point of the label in the first place, is for growth and expansion.
Mhm.
But very quickly that thing can become the opposite.
Yeah, I think slippery slope is the perfect descriptor for that, for sure. Yeah, because we see that a lot, right? I mean, I don't know if you see it in your work as well, but I see it in mine, to where, you know, it's like, and it's hard because, you've been sensitive your whole life, and you've been, a lot of people, most of us have been criticized for it and all these other things. And it's like, finally you have this thing that you can, this title, this label that you can embrace, and it can be really hard to not immerse yourself in it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, the work that I do with clients around parts work, this is a big part of that, right? Is if we over identify with just the term highly sensitive, we might be actually shutting down other parts of ourselves. So, something for me that I've found to be true is that I'm a highly sensitive person, but I'm also high sensation seeking. So these sound opposite, and Elaine Aron's work covers that you can be both. You can be either highly sensitive or not highly sensitive, or you can be high sensation seeking or not. And for me, you know, and I figured this out because when I was so focused on the label of HSP, I sometimes I would even question if that was true, because I had these other parts of myself that wanted the adventure, wanted the novelty, needed adrenaline at times. And then other times I didn't. And if I go too much to one or too much to the other, I'm equally miserable. So I have to find the balance between the two. Um, and it's much easier for me to find the balance when I'm not holding on to those labels and I'm just living presently instead of, clinging to those. So that's been a place where I've seen that apply in my life and in my
Yeah,
work.
yeah, for sure. And we are not just this one thing, right? It's just part of our identity. And we all
Yeah.
have other things to offer. And I guess my main thing is that, I feel like my sensitivity held me back from so many things for so long. And, part of the work that I do is through practicing yoga and all of these different, nutrition and things that I work with people with, is giving them really that solid foundation in their sensitivity, so then they can go out and do these other things and share what they know and how they see the world through their sensitivity, which is such an important perspective that we need now more than ever.
Yeah, as you were saying that, it was really hitting me how if we all, as sensitive people, cling to what it means to be HSP and what it means to be around other people, how that affects us. If we all stayed with that, we would all never leave our house.
I know.
And 20 to 30% of the population's voice would not be heard. And the way we process things is so different that it's a really important voice that needs to be heard. And it's not that it's better than, it's just different because we take in information from different places compared to people who aren't highly sensitive. And so it's a very out of the box, maybe. I don't know that that's quite the right term because that has a different connotation to it than what I mean here, but there's such an important aspect of that is silenced if we all cling to being HSP and then therefore don't participate in our society because it's too much for us. Uh,
Yes.
that gets lost, and that's so sad that you know, a huge percentage of the population would be just unheard.
And it's like I said, I mean, I'm all about, that's why we're here, right? Because we want to empower sensitive people um, to use their voices.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what all of this is about.
Yeah.
Another thing that we can think about maybe letting go of is controlling the outcomes of things. And we kind of touched on this, but um, even if it's not like physically in the external world controlling outcomes, you know, even in our own mind and our own thoughts, I find, um, you know, this could be an issue. You know, like very superficially, you know, if you've planned this outing for months now and the day is finally here and you know the weather's not cooperating or something, you know, it is what it is, but we can ruminate on that and really kind of get stuck in the negative mindset, right? Because in our mind everything is going to go fine, but we can't control the outcome, right? There's things that are out of our control. Life is always changing, everything is fluid. um but I find that the more grounded I am in my daily life and the things that are, you know, really important, um, and with a lot of practice, daily practice, meditation, all of those things. Um, and I'm no guru on the mountaintop by any means. You know, I have struggles like everybody else does, but I find that, you know, the more grounded I am in my daily life, the better equipped I am to handle those twists and turns when they do show up. Um, because they're going to show up eventually. No matter how much we try to avoid them, they're going to show up. And there's some of them are going to be severe. And, you know, how are we going to handle those things when they come up for us? Um, and just learning that, you know, through time and through practice, whatever that practice means for you, that we have all the things. We have all the things within us. We have courage when we really need it. You know, we have love within us when we really need it. We just have to find more ways to connect with them.
Mm-hmm. And staying in that present moment.
Yeah, always.
Because
Yeah, is always a
that
thing.
attachment to the outcome yanks us from the present moment so fast, you know, because now we're trying to figure out how to make that outcome happen.
Mm-hmm. Forcing it.
Right. And I don't know anybody who's ever tried to, like, if you're attached to an outcome of having a fun, happy day and you're really attached to that, was that actually a fun, happy day? Because usually those are the days that blow up in my face. I don't know about you, but for sure, that's like always the recipe for disaster for me.
Putting a lot of expectations.
Yes. Yes. That's a good one. That's a good way to put it.
This is
For
going to be the best vacation ever.
Yeah.
Planning this for 2 years and then, you know,
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's
nothing goes right if you're lucky enough to have a vacation.
you know, so for me, when we talk about controlling outcomes, there's kind of two pieces to this that I think when I think about this, and one is letting go of the attachment to the outcome itself, right? That, which is what we were just talking about, the focus on this is the thing that has to be, or it has to be this way, whatever that is. But then there's also letting go of the behavior for that desired outcome. And the reason why I separate the two is because you can very easily trick yourself into saying, well, I'm pretty go with the flow. I'm not attached to the outcome. But secretly, like unconsciously, you're still like behaving in the way to get the thing, right? To have the outcome you want, even though you also know, well, if it doesn't happen, I'll go with the flow and it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So even though they sound like, you know, if you do one, the other one sticks too, I think there is a separateness to it, trying to be conscious of both.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, like something that I see a lot working with clients is attachments to people, you know, having somebody in their life that they don't want to lose. They're really afraid of losing this person. And I'm guilty of this in the past too. This was a really hard lesson for me to
Yep,
learn.
me as well.
And it's what happens is you end up going overboard trying to keep this person happy, which we can't. We're all responsible for our own happiness. We can't make somebody be happy or make somebody feel anything. But then we start going out of our way to be what they want, do what they want, just anything to keep them pleased so they don't leave us. And then what happens in that process is we totally lose ourselves. We become probably boring to them because nobody wants somebody who's just like agreeing with them
Whatever
all
you
the
want,
time.
sure, whatever you
Whatever
want,
you
sure,
want.
whatever you
Yeah.
want.
I don't care. We'll do what you want to do. We'll eat
Yeah.
what you want to do. I don't care. I don't have a preference. Like that becomes really boring for the other person. And then it also can become, if we're doing too much for them, can feel really engulfing to them. So a lot of these are very codependent behaviors, which a lot of my clients have experienced. And it's letting go of those. So changing those behaviors so we're not losing ourselves. And what ends up happening when we do that, not only do we lose ourselves, but the other person ends up leaving. So we're doing these things for the intended outcome of holding on to this person, when what we really need to be doing is giving them space sometimes, and maybe even disagreeing with them. Maybe we have viewpoints that are different, but that could lead to a really engaging conversation that actually creates more attraction, right? Or a deeper friendship or whatever it is. And so it's counterintuitive to us sometimes to do the opposite of what we think we need to do to have that outcome. So one is letting go of the outcome that this person may leave or they may stay. It is what it is, you know, and simultaneously letting go of the behaviors to get that outcome. That's been a huge part of work that I've done with others and in my own life. Um, and that controlling outcomes, it just really, it brings us down a lot, so much energy that we don't realize. Once you start making that shift, you start to realize how much energy you've wasted doing that. It's exhausting. So it really gives back to everybody when we can let go of controlling those outcomes.
Yeah, and I know I totally understand what you're talking about when you're talking about the energy. I have definitely been there in the past, trying to hold on to a situation, a person, a relationship, um, out of fear.
Mm,
Out of fear, what is my life going to look like without them? For a lot of people, for me back in the day, it was a lot of it was attachment because of finances, which I know is something that a lot of people go through. A lot of women, especially, can go through, can be caught in situations like that. Um, so yeah, so I totally understand everything you're saying is really resonating with me. And I
well,
also, oh,
no, go ahead. Sorry, I thought you were
Oh, I
done.
was just going to say, and I also feel like, though, on another level, that even though we're trying really hard to hold on to this person or this situation, that if we can really stop to connect with ourselves and really, really think about it, process it, and not just think about it, with our mind, but think about it with our heart, process it emotionally. How happy are we really taking ourselves so far away from our authentic self?
Mm-hmm.
That, right? So the more we do this, the more we change ourselves to become something we think someone else might want us to be in order for them, not to leave, that we're talking about just this specific example. How happy are we really if this is
Mm-hmm.
not our authentic self?
Exactly. Oh, that's such a huge point because you become really detached from yourself. And that's when I think more comparing comes in because now we don't feel like we're worthy as ourselves. So it really snowballs fast. The other thing I want to point out related to this too is, it's really important to use our rational thinking brain in general, but also sometimes what's going on with our brain is actually it doesn't always help us. And usually this is more unconscious stuff, but letting go of things like these outcomes that we're seeking, there's a huge brain component to that. And there's a resistance in there that's really natural for us. And it's just that our brains are wired fundamentally to, before anything else, to protect us. It's that survival, and so when we've had past experiences that maybe were traumatic in some way, or that have given us messages that it's not emotionally safe to be who we truly are in some way, our brain is going to naturally say, oh, that's dangerous. And it doesn't know the difference between something that's actually going to take our lives, like when we used to live on the land in the woods,
Yep.
versus something that's an emotional threat to us. And so that's part of what triggers this trying to control the outcome, is that our brain is just trying to protect us. So you mentioned self-compassion earlier today. That's a big piece of it, is recognizing that our brain is trying to protect us. So when we are doing these things, if we can recognize that, we can be like, oh yeah, thank you, but that's not serving me anymore. Actually, this is what I want to do. And that's when we can really initiate change and letting go of these things. So I just want to mention that for anybody who's maybe beating themselves up for not being able or struggling with letting go of certain things, is that that's a very natural part of the process, and our brains are wired to protect us.
Yep, they sure are. They sure are. They don't know the difference between, a tiger and yeah, something like you were just describing, for sure.
Yeah.
Something else that I was thinking of is letting go of the shoulda, woulda, coulda's.
Mm,
And, we've talked before, I think, about not shoulding all over ourselves.
right.
And knowing that, just tying in with everything we've been talking about, thinking and wishing about how we want things to be, how, for example, if you've had a traumatic childhood like myself, wishing that I had grown up with different parents, or wishing, I might be X, Y, and Z now if my mother had only done this,
Mm,
right? That kind of mindset, and really trying to, without at all discounting anyone's trauma, including my own, there gets to a point where it's not constructive anymore, it's more destructive, I feel like, in my own experience.
yeah, I agree with that.
It's wasting, like you were saying, Amber, it's wasting our precious energy, our precious short fleeting time on this planet. And a lot of times it can keep us from doing the things that we want to do in the world, from fulfilling our true purpose and things like that.
Yeah, and I think it's just like with everything, there's that balance. Um, because, also having had a traumatic childhood experiences, those should'ves, could'ves, would'ves, they can really catch up with us in those situations when we're processing things. And part of what can be really hard is our society doesn't recognize the grief that's actually there in that. So I think when we identify those, sometimes we do need a little space for the grief that exists, that, yeah, maybe I could have done this thing, or maybe I would have done that, or I should have done this instead. Those things can really come up for us. And it's okay to take the time to grieve those, because those are, often our culture thinks of grief as loss of a person, but it can also be loss of a vision that we had, or a dream that we had, or a hope, or an idea.
Yep.
And so, and we could at some point probably do a whole episode on grief, or a few even. It's a very complex topic, but sometimes taking a moment to honor that grief can really then help us let go, as long as we're not getting mired in it and really stuck in it. For me, I definitely had to process that grief of, man, if these things didn't happen to me, I could be here. And then I also have to remember, well, maybe, but maybe not, who knows what else would have
Mhm.
happened. And then the acceptance of, well, this is my journey, and all of these things that happened brought me to where I am right now and who I am now. And I love who I am now. And if I erased any of those, I wouldn't be this person. So it's brought me into an acceptance of that. But the grief, I think, is something that we don't usually acknowledge in that. That I think is important, because if we don't, it's hard to let go of these could have, should have, would have, if we don't take a moment to honor that part that is sad there, right? Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
it makes total sense. And I love that you brought that up. And for me, I think it really part of that kind of moving through that grief, and it's an ongoing process, right? Because I never know what might come up for me in a certain situation, something might
Mhm.
trigger me or whatever. But something else that I've learned is that I don't need anyone else to validate that that grief that you're talking about, all of those things when it does come up for me. It's like, well, maybe I tell my husband and he doesn't understand because his childhood wasn't like mine or something like that. And now I know that it's okay. It doesn't have to be the same experience as mine. I validate it for myself, right? And
Yeah,
I
and I
don't
think
need.
that goes right back to the outcomes, right? Controlling
Yeah.
outcomes is
Mhm.
when we're really solid in who we are in that way, we don't have the need to control the outcome anymore. And if we do something and somebody responds in another way, well, that's a reflection of them, not of me. I don't have to control their reaction. I don't need a specific reaction from them. I'm being true to myself, and, you know, being clear in that.
Yep. And all this comes from a long, bumpy road of a
Yes,
lot of
lots of
work.
trial and error.
It's not just, yeah, we didn't
And
just wake up
interesting.
one morning and decide it was going to be like this. No.
Oh, I wish it was that easy, right? And one thing that, I'm always amazed at, when we started, when we talked about doing this as a topic for today, and we had, a few key points that we wanted to discuss. It's always interesting to me that they seem very separate, right? When we first start laying it out. And then as we get having this conversation, it's like, no, it's actually all connected. All these
Mhm.
things, even though they're different things that we're letting go of, they're actually all tied.
Yep. Yep, for sure.
Yeah, and so something else with this too is just that, we're all just on this different journey. Like, I mean, you were talking about, it's not like we just woke up one day and
Yep.
here we were. Um, so I actually, right before we sat down to do this, I was looking out the window and realized I have this tree out back here. And so for those people who are watching us on YouTube, I don't know if you can see. Yeah,
Oh,
still
yeah, I
light
can
enough.
see it. Hmm.
Yeah. So there's this green tree. So I have this oak tree that's still as green can be. And then I have other trees that are every other color. Leaves are all over my ground, but this tree is still green, even though all these trees have had the same weather changes, all the same conditions. And so they're all changing. They're all going to let go of their leaves at some point before winter, but they're not all on the same timeline. And I think that's just a really beautiful metaphor for our journeys as humans, that we're all changing, we're all on a journey. Even if we're exposed to the same things, we're going to be doing it at different rates. And so it also goes back to comparing, right? Not comparing our
Absolutely.
pace of
100%.
life,
Yes.
right? So yeah, and for autumn, like being in autumn, anybody who's listening who might be familiar with Four Shields, the model through School of Lost Borders, for that model, because there's a bunch of different models and I reference different ones depending on the work that I'm doing. But their model, autumn is the west, which is grief, right? Which is what we were just talking about. And it also lines up with adolescence, which is a time when we sort through all of the messages we've received, and we start to look at things and say, oh, this is me. Nope, this one isn't me. And in adolescence, you get to that angsty place of the rebellion. And it's because you're coming into who you are and you're trying to let go. Maybe your parents are saying you're this way or you should be doing this. And it's like, no, I don't want to do that. It's that kind of rebellion. And so it lines up perfectly with this time of year and the stuff we're talking about. So I wanted to kind of bring that into this conversation as well, that it is so applicable to this time of year and letting go and unlearning, and goes back to our topic in here, mixed in here of
Mhm.
the authentic self, right?
Yeah, no, I love that. And now I feel like it's okay if I'm feeling a little bit feisty. Because I am feeling a little bit feisty, I'm not gonna lie.
That's awesome.
And a little bit feisty about I mean, I can share a couple of the things like personally for me that kind of go along with that of letting go of some attachments to things and really unlearning, right?
Mhm.
um I'm getting kind of feisty around um, not making myself smaller to make other people feel more comfortable. I'm starting to
Mm,
realize on my own healing journey that this was and I already knew it, but I didn't know the extent of it. That this was like basically the main theme of my childhood, right? Is making myself smaller to not annoy people or upset, all of these adults who didn't know what the hell they were doing. Um, but and so shrinking myself down to not draw attention to myself.
mhm,
And so that's something that I'm really trying to unlearn. And that goes along with something else, which is sacrificing or silencing my voice. And that's why this podcast is so important to me personally, as well as reaching out and hopefully, trying to lift up and empower other sensitives as well. But it's really important to me at this stage of my journey to start using my voice because
mhm,
I didn't for so long. And I was silenced for decades. First, I was silenced by family, and then I was silencing myself because I didn't know how not to do it. Um, and then another thing that's kind of a part of that as well is distracting myself, whether it's through, I don't know, whatever it is, like sitting down to watch a movie when I really want to be, working on a project that's important to me or something like that, just distracting myself from feeling and from really immersing myself in things that are important to me, instead of processing all of my feelings, emotions, and really working through them to figure out why I feel the need to distract myself
mm.
from progressing, from making that progress. Does that make sense?
It does, and I've been there. And it's an ongoing process of knowing these things and learning these things,
And
and then
noticing, right?
later it's like you're learning the same lesson again of all
Oh,
the things you just
yes.
said, but at a deeper way. And so I've gone through several iterations of exactly what you're
Yes,
talking
yes, yes.
about.
Like, oh, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to work on this. I have it all written down on my calendar. And then all of a sudden I see, that shelf, that bookshelf over there that it just really needs to be dusted. So I better
Mm.
dust that first.
My house is never cleaner than when there's something I don't want to do that's not related to cleaning.
Yes. Okay. You got it. You get it. Oh, I feel better now.
Yeah, yeah. So for me, a big thing that I'm letting go of, and I guess it goes back to the labels, even though I wasn't really thinking of it from that place, is, letting go of preconceived ideas. And that could be about anything. It could be things, it could be people, it could be places, it could be myself. And so I've really been following a lot of Ram Dass's teachings over the last probably 3 to 6 months, and I know his work is just
It's
um,
beyond.
yes, and I'm sad that he's not with us in physical form anymore. But of course, his teachings would say not to be sad
Yes,
about that.
exactly. Exactly.
So work in progress here. Um, but letting go of those preconceived things, because even myself, because I've done so much work, right? Of, noticing the label, finding the label, learning about myself, and then letting go of the label, and really letting go of all of that and just accepting like the trees, right? That the only thing that's really consistent is that everything is always changing. And so like nature is always changing. I'm always changing. The people around me are changing. And so to just be more, I guess it's just also comes back to more presence, like being in that present moment and acceptance of things are the way they are. And I think the reason why I'm at this stage at this point is because I've done so much work on accepting myself and accepting and trusting. I think trusting, that's the word. Trusting myself that, like you were saying, if anything happens, I don't need the external world to be any specific way, right? I trust myself that I can figure it out when I need to and come from that place. So, really letting go of all those preconceived ideas of people, things. Um, and it's hard because it gets very like up in your head, kind of,
Yep.
versus actual practicing it, because it's definitely harder than said than done, easier said than done. Um, but that's been really huge for me, and I'm finding so much more peace when I'm able to do that. Of course, like you were saying earlier, I'm not perfect at this. And it's hard because sometimes things will happen, right? And we also get attached to emotions sometimes. Like sometimes things happen and it's like, no, I want to be mad about that.
Yep.
I need to, I should be mad about it. And I get anchored in that, right? And it's like, why? When I can step outside of it and let go of that, I'm so much happier. I waste so much less energy. My energy stores are higher. I feel better. But sometimes that's the human side.
Yep.
And so, allowing that, but also not getting stuck in it. So really just releasing all of that, letting those things go, especially from that place in my mind that's got these preconceived ideas or labels. Even if it's based on truth in the past, right? Just that acceptance of people change, things change. And I just feel my world expanding so much more doing that.
Mm.
I'm definitely not perfect at it and I still have my pitfalls. And then when you remind yourself when you're stuck in that trap, it's like, crap, here I am again.
It's
Okay.
life is cyclical, right? I mean, everything it's a spiral. It's not linear. We always, as soon as we get to the end, we come right back to the beginning.
Right. And and we see that in nature. We see that in
Yeah.
so many things. And then I also find if I can bring a little humor to it,
That's
I'll often
always
tell people
helpful.
there's my human side coming out again. Because we're in human form. We're gonna have things that maybe we wish we did differently, right? Goes back to the
Yeah.
should. Um, and then just letting go of them. The sooner we can let go of
Self-compassion.
them, the sooner we return to peace.
Yep. Self-compassion. Something else that we're not typically taught.
Yeah, yeah, we're
So
not taught so many things
I
that
know.
are helpful to us. It's really unfortunate. Yeah.
It's a never
And
list.
that
It's a never-ending list.
it is. And really, it just all of this just comes down, I think, to letting go of attachment to anything, which goes back to those Buddhist principles of that suffering comes from, those attachments that we have.
Yeah.
And letting go of the attachments, we're not creating suffering for ourselves. And that's kind of what I was getting at there with my example. Curious what you might have.
Yeah. No, and
Yeah.
I just think that it's important to say that like letting go of attachments doesn't mean that we don't care about things or we
Mm,
don't care about people in our lives and we don't care about, what's going on in the world. It's just seeing it from an observer's point of view versus putting ourselves in the story. I feel
yeah.
like is how that's how I interpret it for myself. Um,
Yes. And that's what you just jogged my memory of part of the point that I was trying to make, but I ended up kind of going somewhere else with it unexpectedly, is, related to Ram Dass's teachings. One of the things he says is how there's always these paradoxes in our world. And I love paradox. It's just a fun concept to play with, but he talks about how kind of the first step is identifying who we are and really getting clear on who we are. But then as soon as we figure out and get clarity on who we are, our next goal is to actually let go of who we think we are So it is an important step in the healing process and the human evolution of our journey. But then at a certain point, we have to let go of who we think we are because we're changing. And something you just said reminded me of that, and that's kind of where I was headed with the point before, because it is just um, part of our journey and part of that letting go. But there's that paradox, right? Of great, I just figured out who I am. Now I'm supposed to let go of
Yeah.
that, you know. But the letting go of it is allowing us to not suffer as much, because if I cling to this is who I am, now I'm going to be clinging to that, and something's going to come along that's not going to fit this. And
Yeah,
it's going
not
to
going
be,
to
as
fit
long
that
as I cling
picture.
to it, it's going to be suffering. But if
Hmm.
I can let go of it, I can stay present and um, just feel better and happier.
Yes, it is a complicated, lifelong process. It is with lots of stops and starts. Um, and I think that's really probably the main takeaway that I'd like people to come away with from this episode is that it's not it's not an easy process. It's okay to feel lost. It's okay to feel frustrated, right? Because we all feel that way. I think the most important part is just developing that awareness through practice and trial and error, really. And that's individual to everyone. It's not going to be, Amber's journey is not mine, mine's not hers. Um, and so we're all going to, be different in the way that we walk this path of letting go and unlearning if we choose if we choose that path, if we feel like it's the one that we want to walk.
Yeah, and it's also it's a different order for everybody too. There's no one way. So it depends on what your journey's been and your unique way of processing or interests or experiences that we all end up kind of going to the same place in the end, but the order in which we pull pieces out is different. And really for me, I think the big thing that I want people to take away is, just that first level of the awareness. Because once we have the awareness of, oh, this isn't working for me. Or I'm doing this thing. Because we've covered so many different topics on different pieces of letting go. And if I had heard most of these at the beginning of my journey, it wouldn't resonate the way it does now, right? But I can't say which one for each person.
Yep.
Everybody's is going to be different. So, and then to also just the acceptance of, if you have to have a little grief to move to the next step, the acceptance around that, and that grief, that processing that grief is also a form of letting go.
Mm.
And so there's so much to it, like you were saying.
Yep. So for anyone who's listening or watching, Amber and I, we'd like to invite you to think about what you might want to start letting go and unlearning in your own life. Um, we'd like to offer just a simple thought, or maybe you can use it as a journal exercise, with, just thinking in terms of my life can be better if I let go of or learned blank, because then I can blank. My life can be better if I let go of or unlearned, um, whatever it may be that comes to your mind. This is why journaling can be so helpful. And if you let go of that thing, or if you start to unlearn it, what then can you make space for in your life? Because we only have so much space,
Mm-hmm.
right, in our lives, and we carry all these things with us. And so the more we can learn to let go of these other things, we can start to invite these other things into our lives that can really help us on our journey to wherever we want to go.
Yeah, I love that journal prompt, and because it just really carries you from the first thought into more of a why, more of a meaning behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just like add to it a little bit. I know sometimes if I sit down to do a journal entry, sometimes I'm so focused on I'm going to journal this thing that I get a block. So just if anybody is trying to do this and they hit that block similar to how I do sometimes, what I do is I take it outside. And so I might go sit on my front steps or go sit next to a tree or in a park or even go for a walk in nature and do it after being outside for 5 or 10 minutes. And sometimes it just clicks a lot quicker for me. So if you're somebody who struggles with that, maybe that's a little trick to.
No, I love that. I think I'm going to do that actually. I love that idea. Thank you. And we'll put the journal prompt in the show notes for both YouTube and for the podcast on the website. So we are so grateful, as always, that you've chosen to spend this time with us. Amber and I love talking about these things, and we love sharing all of our experiences with you. And you can follow us on Instagram, on Facebook for all of the latest things. And you can subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel so you don't miss any of our videos that go along with the podcast, so we can wave to you and say hi. And yeah, so when you subscribe, you won't miss any of the good stuff. And we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Take care. See you next time.